We're good? All right. All right, well, good morning. I will call the Tuesday, November 9, 2021 Urbandale City Council meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Montgomery.
Here.
Caduce.
Here.
Obrecht.
Here.
Russell.
Here.
And Poogie's absent. All right, thank you, Nicole. All right, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Motion by Obrecht, second by Caduce. Discussion, roll call.
Obrecht.
Yes.
Caduce.
Yes.
Russell.
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery.
Yes.
All right, move on to item 3. We have 2 items for discussion today. And the first is on regional water. AJ, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you. As the mayor mentioned, the first item on your agenda today for review is an update on the discussions that have been taking place over the last several years regarding water and water distribution and production and everything associated with water in the Des Moines metro area. As the mayor will attest to, and as our guest that will make a presentation will also confirm, there has been a significant amount of discussion probably for the last 3 to 4 years about where the metro is going to ensure that we have ample and affordable water for all the growth and the development that is taking place or that will take place in the future. As with any discussions with a variety of political entities, there has been some spirited discussions concerning where we should be going with water. All with the same goal in mind is that everybody wants to be part of the solution, but getting there is always sometimes part of the problem. But having said that, I also had the opportunity to sit in on some of those meetings, not as many as the mayor did. Mayor was our representative from the city that went and sat through many of those meetings, but really all the hard work was done by the Urbandale Water Utility. Dale Atchison is the general manager, and he was, and John McEwen, who is the chair of the board, they were knee-deep into all these discussions from the beginning. And so I thought it would be appropriate, as those discussions have been ongoing, that the council receive an update as to where they are in that process, because I think there's been an evolution of that discussion over those many years. And I think it's appropriate that they just tell you where they're at now and where they believe they're heading when it comes to water production, because it is, going through the recent drought that we did this summer. I think it just amplifies the notion that water is now almost a development commodity. Is that if you have water, an ample supply of water and availability, then development and opportunities and home growth and everything that's associated with the good things that we want to do as a city, if you don't have clean, ample water at an affordable rate, that becomes an item that almost like, any other utility, how expensive it is for electric or natural gas, and water is that commodity that none of us can do without. So I think those discussions have been extremely critical. But again, I will have to defer to Dale and the folks that have been working on this much harder than I and are much more engaged in those conversations for that update. So at this time, I'd like to invite Dale to the lectern and to give an update, if you would, please.
Good morning. As AJ, excuse me? Yeah, I'd like to fill it with tap water, but yeah, you're right. We actually had some bottles that we did in conjunction with the region to fill them with tap water, but that was a few years ago. As AJ mentioned, we have been in great discussion, but I think it's only fair that I bring you, because some of you I don't think have ever met me, for one thing, and secondly, I think it's only fair to you understand where the Board of Trustees has been in the process and how we got where we are today. So in doing so, we just want to know we were established in 1936 and we're governed by a Board of Trustees. John McEwen, by the raise of his hand, is our chairman. Pat Bodie is one of the trustees. Phil Noah, who is not currently here, maybe online, I'm not sure, but they are our Board of Trustees. Gail Palmer is my distribution manager, and myself. So yesterday, today, and the future, Urbandale Water Utility and the entire metro is definitely at a crossroads for the production and delivery of water. It is at a crossroad. The old pass is no longer working. As I'll demonstrate to you and show that we definitely need a change in the process and the way of doing business than what we've done in the past. So what brings us here? In 1934, Urbandale began purchasing water from Des Moines Waterworks. Fast forward to 1992, we participated with Des Moines, West Des Moines, and Urbandale to spearhead an agreement in which we constructed a feeder main from downtown, a 42-inch and a 36-inch, to the Louise Moon Booster Station, which is located at 156 north of Hickman, to deliver water to the west. We participated by investment of $4.8 million. In 1993, as many of you may recall, brought with it the urgency and the need for redundancy in our system. One plant was no longer, we realized that one plant was not a good idea. We needed some redundancy. Again, the three utilities came together in construction in agreement with others and brought them to the table and built Moffett Treatment Plant to create some redundancy. Urbandale Water Utility invested $7.9 million towards purchase capacity. Purchase capacity is the opportunity provided to us that not necessarily buys assets or infrastructure, but capacity in the system to buy down a rate. By investing in the system, we bought a cheaper rate, got a cheaper rate. There was others that did not participate in that, and they pay a much higher rate for their cost of water. And so Urbandale, with forward thinking, invested in that. In 1997, growth in the northern area, Ankeny was in need of water, looked at building their own treatment plant. At that time, Des Moines Waterworks negotiated with them, and they decided to participate and build an additional plant, Saylorville, in 1997. We invested $16.8 million in that infrastructure. The ending result and culmination of all those things, bringing them all together in 2005, the utility and area regions within the region decided to make a common agreement of purchase capacity. We ended up with 15.3 million gallons per day invested in the system that we could draw on, use in any fashion in which we chose. Our current, our peak and max day has been a little over 11 million gallons. Our current day this year was about 10.2. So well within that range of staying underneath that capacity. If you exceed that capacity, you go into a penalty, a ratcheting rate, a combination of this higher with storage rate, purchase capacity, and somewhere in the line of the median of a calculation, you end up with a different rate. Ankeny and others, Norwalk and others are in that place right now, which has an impact on region and the profitability of regionalization. In 2009, rates began to escalate by double digits. As you can see, in 2009 to 2011, they began to escalate, and that was the point in time in which the Board of Trustees said, hey, we need to look at other options, see what are available to us. An interesting thing, it kind of paints a picture here. If you look at that 2008 to 2011, guess what happened in 2011? The Board of Trustees said, we're going to investigate other water sources. It put pressure on Des Moines Waterworks to keep rates even keel, and they did that, and we continue with other options, as I will show you here shortly. But in 2016, the Iowa legislation came after Des Moines Waterworks and engulfed West Des Moines and Urbandale in that due to the lawsuit that came about against those three counties, and the Iowa legislature came out. It also brought about the discussions for regionalization. We put our treatment plant on hold, interestingly enough, see the forward progression of rates that has then since occurred. In 2022, in April, our rate will go to $3.08. They were advocating for a 30% increase, which would have taken us to $3.68, the proximity of there. In combination with some availability fees, that rate would have reached that. We reached out to them and said, that's not a good idea. We're in negotiations with regionalization. If you want to blow this thing up, that's a good way to do it. They responded to us and held it to a 15% increase, which is still very substantial, but certainly much less than the projected that they first came up with. So in 2011, as I mentioned, the Urbandale Board of Trustees decided to look at other options. They hired McClure Engineering to do a source water study. We found some quarries along the Des Moines River that would meet the needs. So we purchased 200 acres, referred to as the Urbandale Reservoir, for source water along the Des Moines River, and a 32-acre site right behind Merle Hay Road and against the interstate on Sutton Drive for a treatment plant. We obtained the DNR permit to withdraw water from Des Moines Waterworks, or excuse me, Des Moines River. Estimated cost at that time with distribution and treatment was around $60 million. Today, those costs are estimated to be around $85 million. So the possibility of we continued with McClure in 2016 to begin a partial design to establishing firm costs. And as I stated in 2016, the plant was put on hold due to the Iowa legislation and pressures from there, so to begin investigate regional authority. So that's how we got to regional authority, and why Des Moines Waterworks is really legitimately at the table, because of those pressures that we put on them, as well as West Des Moines and others that said, hey, there are other options out here, we're gonna look at it. And so what does a regional utility mean to the metro? It simply means that all potable water production, it is not a complete utility that handles every customer and we all become one. It simply has to do with the production of water. So under the regional concept, all production would be manufactured by a region. So Des Moines Waterworks facilities, West Des Moines Water facilities, our source water, Altoona potentially, Grimes potentially, would be, the operation of those productions would be under the regional utility. Individual utilities, or for instance, Urbandale Water Utility, would still govern much like it is today, in that we would be responsible for setting the rates for our customers based on our needs for expansion and meeting growth for the utility and for the city. So those wouldn't change. It is different, however, than the WRA. We want to compare it to that. There were federal dollars at that time. 50% of the monies that made the WRA came from the federal government. It was a new infrastructure. It was a new plant. Everybody said, okay, we need this capacity, I'll buy this amount. It was a very simple, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it was much easier than existing infrastructure with existing debt and all those things to accomplish. So it's different. So in 2014, the Central Iowa Drinking Water Commission hired Black & Veatch to discuss regionalization. The study was very in depth. Obviously, it was very expensive, and it kind of dissolved and dissipated. Again, in 2016, it was brought back to the table. The three utilities hired FCS to facilitate discussions between the metro communities for regionalization of water production for the area. We went through comparisons of existing. What's it look like existing? What's it look like in the future? What will regional look like? What are those rates and costs? What are the future growths that we need to evaluate from today to 2060? We created a financial model to evaluate those costs. Determined rate methodology of max day or average day or blended day. Peaking was a huge issue. That was the 30% increase that Des Moines Waterworks was trying to pass just here shortly, was peaking. There is some legitimacy to peaking and additional costs that it places upon the infrastructure, because you have to build for a few weeks of the year, because we spike usually for 2 to 3 weeks in the year, and there is a legitimate cost to that associated with that. Long-range planning, as you can imagine and can understand, with all of these complex issues, and as the mayor can attest, who was in many of those meetings, it was difficult to move forward. Number of communities, number of issues, many issues seem to be parked, and said we'll discuss those later and come back to them. Hard to resolve. So, and then as you all know, COVID hit. So we put a pause on that, and so in mid-2020, the three utility boards came together again and said, hey, let's see if the three of us can come to an agreement that makes sense. And one of the major issues that was on everybody's plate was governance and how does that work. So we began to dig into regional composition and what that might be. It came to a conclusion that 100,000 everybody would have one vote at the table. We looked at a number of scenarios that some of were not very palatable to other communities. So the end result was everybody gets a vote at the table. Those who have 100,000 in population get 2 votes. So that's only being Des Moines Waterworks at this time. Ankeny probably is the next closest, but that's a few years from now. Population, so then there was this issue of, well, how do you do, because Des Moines has full service customers. For instance, Pleasant Hill is a full service. They provide all services to Pleasant Hill, to Windsor Heights, to Berwick, and other Cummings, other small communities. So how do we incorporate that into and them still honor their contracts? So there was an agreement that they would still remain in that capacity, and they would fall under their populations and their consumptions would fall under Des Moines Waterworks. Then you have the rural water systems, which is how do you put a population on them? And they're greatly affected by agricultural and feedlots and those things. They have a ethanol plant that greatly influences their capacity. We had to deal with those issues and how do we come to a conclusion? So then there was this weighted vote issue that's in the WRA. So in the event that an entity calls for a weighted vote, how do we accomplish that? Des Moines wanted population because their population percentage was higher than it would be if it was consumption. We negotiated those out and ended up being at a consumption-based. While we do serve people, we are a water industry, and it should be based on consumption, and that was the end result of that. As the end result of that, that will mean that in a weighted vote, Urbandale will only have 8% of that vote. So decisions that we cast as one vote will only be 8% of that weighted vote. Des Moines Waterworks will have approximately 40%. So then the next major topic was, I'm not keeping track of my time here. Hopefully there we go. Okay. The next major hurdle was in the beginning, there was not going to be asset transfer. We talked about it, but really was no asset transfer. The longer we discussed it, the greater we said, hey, for this to be a region and no longer controlled by simply Des Moines Waterworks or simply by those who own the assets, it needs to be owned by the region. And so we came to an agreement that we would begin to evaluate the costs of the core network, of the production facilities. Core network, I'm referring to the major transmission lines that delivers water from the production facilities to the points of source of entry to various entities. So those normally are larger than 16-inch mains. Most of them are 24 and larger. So the core nets, also water, some ASRs, some water towers associated with strictly the delivery to the core network would also become a part of the assets. So we had to evaluate all of those assets for not only Des Moines, West Des Moines, a big deal to put it lightly. So then how do you establish a cost to those things? Not an easy thing. So it was agreed that we would use the book values of what those current book values of what those structures are. So if something's fully depreciated, there's no cost associated with that. If there's something that's just recently built, then you have a lot of cost. And it was agreed that we would use 50% of the book value. Well, we thought that was easy, but then we learned that Des Moines Waterworks is operating 2 different depreciation schedules, one for rates and one for assets. And it's different than what West Des Moines is using. And so how do we work through that? And how do we come to an asset, to a balance sheet asset that works for everybody? And we were able to work through that, come to an agreement. For instance, Des Moines Waterworks was depreciating some of their infrastructure at 110 years. West Des Moines was depreciating the same asset at 40 to 50 years. So how do you merge all that together? So again, I go back to the WRA, new asset, easy, everybody starts beginning. Now we got to merge existing pre-owned assets, difficult thing. But we were able to work through those things and I think come to a reasonable conclusion. So then we have existing debt, and how do we handle that? You have debt that's owned by Des Moines Waterworks, you have debt that's owned by West Des Moines Waterworks, you have private loans, you have SRF loans. How do you merge all those into a new entity because we're transferring assets? Fortunately, many of those debts are expiring. In fact, the Urbandale Water Utility just paid off of one of their purchase capacity loans just this of $3.6 million just this past few months ago, saving the utility over the next 3 years about $250,000 to $300,000. You know, so we were able to buy down. West Des Moines done the same thing to free up some of those assets, overcome some of those hurdles. There's still a few of those still out there, but I think we're going to be able to work through it. So then how do you put a valuation on purchase capacity? We own 15.3, which is almost $25 million worth of assets that we've contributed to the region. It's 20 years into a 40-year contract. So how do we come to a conclusion? Well, we worked through a solution. We've come to a reasonable solution that we placed a value on that asset. It's been merged into the assets, and we will receive benefit from that. The end result will be a culmination of all of those things that will determine how much will Des Moines Waterworks get as a buyout, how much will we have to pay as a buy-in, and I can tell you it's millions. It's a considerable cost. I'm not going to go into the weeds because some of these things are still in negotiation and many of them have been in closed session, but I want to give you an overview concept of what we've been talking about. So then how do you handle growth expansion? Originally, Des Moines Waterworks said, hey, we're not growing minimally. We don't participate in any growth. That's all on you suburbs, growth communities. We said, well, okay, let's back up a little bit. Let's rewind to 1997 when you come to us and said, hey, we need redundancy. We need a Moffett plant. We need redundancy in the system because our customers lost water and we need you to help us. So there was a benefit to redundancy. And so we brought that back up and said, hey, there is a benefit to all communities for redundancy, for new technology, for better quality water. All of those things attributed and can and are benefit to all communities, whether they're growing or not. So the solution we came up with was 90, and this was a negotiation process, but 91% will be paid for all growth communities. So if we build a treatment plant to the west, those communities that are driving the growth will pay for 91% of it. Those communities that do not need additional growth, they will pay, that whole picture will be 9% and they will pay a piece of that based on their ownership of the entire region. For instance, us, it would be 8% of that 9%. So there's a participation and piece in that that has to do with growth that meets all. For instance, as I just said there, in the future, it's very likely that Urbandale, with the ability to build an ASR, which is simply a well drilled in the ground in which we can store millions of gallons of water to be drawn upon those peak times in the summer. So you'd have to build production. It's much easier, cheaper to push it in the ground and then return it. And we have every intentions of doing that at the right time. But if we're able to do that with at least one ASR and potentially two, there's a very real possibility that Urbandale may not need any growth for decades. And so that's a big deal, and it helps in making all phases and all discussions for cost. So we could end up paying 9% of the region's cost, even though we don't need it. Is there a benefit? Certainly. Water quality, those very things that we said conceptually wise, whether we need it or not, that's a good thing. Obviously, capital improvement projects, planning and being a part of that, to be approved by the region is a benefit. Peaking rates severely impacts Urbandale and growth communities. This was really a heartburn thing when Des Moines Waterworks presented this peaking thing because in our mind, we paid for 15.3 million of capacity. We're not using it. We should be able to use it any way you want. And so we're going to be penalized substantially, and that was only the beginning. This could come back up again, because again, in weighted vote, as I mentioned, others are going to benefit. For instance, Ankeny will benefit from a peaking because they have an ASR that lowers their peak. And so they're also in this peaking because they don't have the purchase capacity or forward thought that we did. And so they're in a different situation. And West Des Moines is in a different situation. Everybody's different. Not one shoe fits all. Not all makes sense for everybody, but certainly peaking will have a severe impact. There was a belief that we should have a third-party fiduciary that administrates budgeting, coordinates meetings, oversees rates, so that there's a security that is felt by all that we have some other oversight other than Des Moines Waterworks. Operational contracts, again, we get, those are yet to be determined, but it's appearing that we'll have a term of 10 to 20 years and likely 20. We have union contracts that are involved in that, a number of things that are anticipated expectations will be laid out for what those operations. So if we do an asset transfer, those entities that own those assets, for instance, Des Moines Waterworks, West Des Moines, they will be contracted to continue to operate those. And as long as they're able to produce water at a reasonable rate, their contracts are reasonable, they're meeting the water quality standards, I don't see any reason that that will change. It is potential in the future that they could become employees of a region if the region decided to go there. So, regionalization. Pros, 0 to 20 years, less costly for ratepayers. Joint cooperation, participation, all involved in the overall concept of regional and providing water for everybody, certainly a pro. Regional responsibilities for all production needs and requirements. It's up to the region, not Urbandale, to meet those standards, to meet those water quality issues. A voice on rates and capital improvements. Future expansion costs shared by all. The cons, long-term more costly to ratepayers. Only one voice. Again, that 8% percent in a weighted vote. Few entities can control the region by a weighted vote. And what I say by that is we have Des Moines Waterworks, who has 40% of the weighted vote, Ankeny, who has 11, suddenly you have 51%. They can control the weighted vote. We are negotiating within the contract, well, forget I said that. I'm not gonna go there, okay? But those things are under negotiation and we're working with them, I'll say that much. In trying to prevent major things that could change the outlook for regionalization in the future to make it a good or bad thing. We're trying to prevent those things. And expansion to cost, whether Urbandale Water Utility needs it or not, peaking rate or penalty is likely in the future. I think there is a good chance in the future that it will be, but what we're saying is give us time to adjust, to realize, to do what we can to soften that. So if water utility treatment plant was an option, the pro would be long-term investment benefits. Because I'll tell you that the curve looks like this. If you do a treatment plant, its rates increase dramatically in the first 4 or 5 years because we're paying for the onset of this large capital investment. So they're going to be very high in the first 4 or 5 years. And then they kind of flatline and they just a very slow progression up. Because at the end of the 20 years when we need additional demand, we're able to bring on ASRs, we're able to do other things that just continues that debt rate. Versus regional starts here and then as a progression, because there's not a lot of capital investment, but as a progression, it just continues at a small marginal increase forever. Well, those intersect at about 20 years. And so the decision has to be made by the Board of Trustees is that difference as we look out into the future worth our own investment or do we want to stay with the region? Those are some things that the Board of Trustees will have to negotiate or understand. Control of all expansion and growth decision will be totally ours. Definitely a benefit, timing, everything, how we do it, definitely would be in our control. Short-term higher costs, that's a con. Responsible to meet our drinking water standards. That's a huge responsibility to be taken on, and one we do not take lightly, because it definitely a responsibility. Additional staff. There are others that you can associate both pros and cons on both sides of this. So in the future, what I can tell you is water rates are going up. There is no ifs, ands, and buts. No option is cheap, and water rates will go up. The outcomes documents, which is to come out shortly, very shortly, on the results of the negotiations and conversations that those utility board run utilities will come out very shortly. We are developing a memorandum of understanding that says, hey, if those concepts that we've agreed to, and if the Board of Trustees from each utility agrees that that's the direction we should pass, there's a memorandum of understanding that if we meet those things, we're on board, based on the direction that they choose. Individuals will also at that same time begin to analyze the information that we've gathered together. They'll have opportunity to gather and present questions to this group, microgroup. So going forward, Urbandale Water Utility will have decisions on direction. Do we build our own treatment plant? Or do they do regional water production? Those are definitely crossroads that are coming to a head very shortly, and we're going to pick a path, and that's the direction we're going to go, full head, based on whatever the 28E will involve in it and those agreements. So what could change? So let's say that the water board, utility board says, okay, we're going down the path of regionalization. It's still, the things that will have a great impact will be how many members will participate. If Grimes drops out, if Altoona drops out, if West Des Moines drops out, or any one of those three, or there's conversation that perhaps the rural waters will not participate and become a full service customer of Des Moines Waterworks. All of those things have impacts on the bottom line to Urbandale. So those things will be understood that as those change, and I'm not saying that 2 or 3 of those entities couldn't drop out and it might still make sense, certainly a real possibility, but we have to weigh those things. 28E and 20F, as you all know, the devil's in the details. So if we can get those hammered out based on the concepts that we've agreed to, very likely it could move forward. Operational contracts, again, as I said, are still to be negotiated and figure out the fine details of that. That's a 30,000 foot level of where we've at. It's taken, as AJ mentioned, a number of years to get here, and I guarantee you that we've been meeting bi-weekly, sometimes just monthly, but many, many times over those past years in trying to get to this point that we are today. And we're taking an earnest look at all of our options to what's best for our customers. That's all I have, if you have any questions.
I don't know why you haven't been able to resolve it, Dale. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, someone who's been a part of a lot of these discussions, I think Dale did a very good job of just summarizing where we are. But as you can obviously see, there is a lot going on here. And in the years I've been involved in these discussions, all of these things have come up, and they all have to be discussed and worked out. And so that's why when people look from the outside and say, why haven't we gotten to a regional solution? Well, it's not quite as easy as it first might appear, and there are a lot of considerations to factor. So Dale, I think you did a great job of summarizing it.
Thank you.
In a short amount of time, so I'll open up. David, you got a question?
My understanding is we have a permit, Urbandale Water has a permit from the DNR to pull water out of the river.
That's correct.
And that permit was renewed just recently, and if so, how much longer before?
We're getting very close to the end of that. I'm not saying that it can't be renewed, but we will have to make, as I just said, we will have to make a decision very shortly as to whether we're going to ask for an extension on that.
And then if we do decide to
And,
go,
and so, I'm sorry, but just to clarify the need for that, we have those quarries that are source water that will meet the majority of our demand. In the event that we'd have an extreme drought, we have the ability to pull water from the river and pump it into those quarries, which gets detention time, helps improve the water quality, a number of things. So it's a benefit that we have that and a need. So that's the purpose of that.
but we have to have that permit before we're able to continue to do that. Have that ability.
I wouldn't say the absolute that we have to have that, but it would hamper our ability to meet our long-range goals for sure if we did not have it.
And if we did go with the regionalization, what would we do with the ground that we've already purchased out north?
That would become a part of the region. It would be an asset that's contributed to the region. We would be given a monetary value placed on that as a part of our buy-in to the region.
How big is that? How many acres?
There's 200 acres that are the source water. We have the 32 acres then is located then, they're just
Ground.
west of Merle.
That might well become future source water for a regional solution.
It could very, very possibly, yes.
And you say right now our peak is, we can buy 15.2, but our peak jumped to 11?
We had a peak back in 2012, which was an extremely dry year of 11.3, I think. Since then, 10.2, 10.3 has been our max day. So we have a very large cushion, a little bit of a heartburn. The utility board's always been advanced in their thinking. We bought excess capacity looking to the future to meeting demands of Urbandale. And Des Moines has been wanting to change that contract. And so that's been a little bit of a contention, but that all would go away if regionalization occurred.
Thank you. I know it's been a long process. We've been following it for a number of years.
And then, so like this summer, we obviously hit a drought stage, and there's talk about not enough capacity is available in some of those drought stages. Is it more storage that's needed, or is it more capacity production that's needed?
It
as we
is
hit droughts?
really, the crux of that is the ability to treat the quality of water that's coming down. There was enough capacity in the river, but the microsystems were high in the river, causing some plugging of filters, so they were not able to produce the amount of water, and so that's why they kind of went into this. Let's cut back, a voluntary request to cut back so that we can maintain that. When those went away, we had plenty of capacity. We are in the long-range plan looking at investing in some alluvial wells next to the river, which will improve that water quality as it comes in. Obviously, there's a great cost to that, but we're looking into other options. Yep.
And so the storage, I think it was ASR, you mentioned, does that help also in those timeframes of being able to pull out of there? I'm guessing
Yeah, so what an ASR does, you pump down in the ground in the winter when you're having low consumption. And so for instance, one of the ASRs that Des Moines Waterworks has, they have the ability to pump 1 million gallons down a day, and they normally store about 300 MGD down there, 100 to 300 depending on the capacity of the well. And so you can draw that volume. You have to monitor it based on water quality because it changes as you begin to get to the end of it, and that tells you when you got to stop. And so that just flattens your peak because we're now going to take 3 million out of the ground and apply it to our 11 max day. Well, now our max day is 8. And so it raises your average day, lowers your peak to offset those peak needs for the system. Okay. Yeah, Ankeny has an ASR. Des Moines has 2 ASRs. Waukee is looking at, West Des Moines has 1 ASR, actually joint with Des Moines Waterworks.
thank you.
And we haven't developed that, quite frankly, because we have more than an amount of purchase capacity. And there's not, as you can imagine, there's power cost to pump it down, there's power cost to bring it back up, and treatment costs. So those are 60, 70 cents a 1,000 gallons that you add to the cost of water to be able to shave off that peak. So there's a cost to balancing act for us. Yeah.
What is our role as a city council in this, Mayor?
Well, again, the reason we are here today, I mean, we've had the water utility since 1936, right? 36, yeah. So the water utility is, the trustees are the ones that govern this. And, you know, I appoint the trustees, and so we have more of an oversight role, but the water utility is a separate functioning utility that makes the final decision on this. So we don't have any regional solution. We will not have, we will not be a direct party to the agreement. The water utility will be the direct party to the agreement, same as West Des Moines and Des Moines. But, you know, the reason we're doing this today is I am constantly talking to John and Dale and, you know, attending the water utility meetings. So we have the same interests, but, you know, we have an indirect role at this point.
I mean, I think this is fascinating. I mean, this is the first I've heard of from you in my 2 years almost on the council. And so I appreciate the information and bringing us up to speed. But I mean, those basic questions of the roles, I don't quite,
As Bob mentioned, I mean, we're set up under the Iowa code that the Water Utility Board has the same powers as the council, buy, sell land, do all the necessary things. We're a separate enterprising fund. We've received no taxation. It's all based on water rates. They certainly have the authority to do whatever you as a council. Having said that, we certainly need your support in anything we do.
Yeah.
You know, you are the public people, perception to people. We need your support in any decision that's made.
So you continued to list the Des Moines Waterworks, West Des Moines, and Urbandale. Are those the three, like, public utilities that are in this discussion, and the other ones are customers of Des Moines Waterworks, or what?
The three utilities, West Des Moines, and Urbandale, are only the three board-run utilities that are under this way of government that I've just discussed. Everybody else is under a city council, city government, and so, but those three boards have been the drivers of water because that's what we do. It's all I think about 365 days a year is water. You obviously have many other hats and responsibilities that you have to take care of. And so as a result of that, those three entities normally step to the front and say, we're talking about water, we're invested in water every day. And so we're the drivers of things that happen, quite honestly.
So Ankeny City Council would be making decisions on behalf of what they're going to do. How do they get their water? Do they get their water from Des Moines Waterworks, or do they have their own?
They get all of their water
Quasi-utility.
from Des Moines Waterworks. The only people that produce their own water is West Des Moines, Altoona, and Grimes.
Okay. Thank you. This is very interesting. And
The reason we're bringing it up now, the reason we haven't brought it up really in the last 2 years either, Bridget, is, as Dale alluded to, it's really been moving at glacial speed in the last 6, 7 years, 10 years. But I do think in the last 24 months, the three water utilities working together have really advanced this to the point of where it is right now. And as Dale's presentation suggests, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. Still a lot of things to work out, but they're getting it baked to the point, I think, that hopefully we're getting to that point, and that's why we wanted to bring everybody up to date and see where it is, because there really wasn't a whole lot to highlight or talk about until they could at least say, we have general consensus on a lot of core issues that then we can say, yes, we're moving to that point, so.
Are they still getting some pressure from the legislature to do something?
No, to my knowledge, there's no
Back
pressure
on.
at this time. Now, could that come back? Yeah, it hasn't been forgotten, I'll tell you that. Nor has the lawsuits that Des Moines Waterworks brought, so.
So Dale, a couple questions just to get, the 200 acres, that's really in essence an underground storage facility of water, right? That's where the quarries are?
No, it is, in fact, did I have that in here? Oh, I'm sorry. I had a picture. It is a above ground surface water storage facility. It's really a quarry is what it is.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So they're quarries. I was thinking
Yeah.
underground, but they're above, they're just
Yep.
big holes.
Versus the ASR,
Which is the
which is
normal-
aquifer storage, which goes down into the Jordan and basically disperses that existing water with treated water.
Got it.
And then we have to bring it back up and re-chlorinate it and add a few small things, but.
Got it. Okay, that draws the distinction for me. I appreciate that. And then what is any estimated timing on when you might be getting some of the final documents as to when you might have a direction?
Well, I cannot speak for the board necessarily, but I believe that we're coming to, that within the next 2 months, we will have a finalization that says at least the path in which we're headed. And then all of those 2080 documents and all those things will follow that. We're in hopes that if regionalization happens, that by the end of the year, we could have a 2080 in place and regionally could potentially begin by the end of the year. Again, a lot of legal documents and things that have with, as you can imagine, review from our legal and every other community around here to make that all happen, so.
Well, thank you. Fascinating stuff. I appreciate the detail.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, any further comments or questions? Dale, thank you. John and Pat, thank you for being here today as well. And thank you for all your hard work on this as well, so appreciate it. All right. Moving on then to an update on the Des Moines Airport Terminal Project and the funding review. AJ, or you want to take us off?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you. Over the last several weeks, I have forwarded information to you concerning an opportunity that has been presented to our community along with other communities and counties throughout the Des Moines Central area region concerning improvements at the Des Moines Municipal Airport. Mr. McKay from the Des Moines Airport Authority is here today to kind of give you an overview of that project for those of you who aren't familiar with the project that has been proposed and has been kicked around publicly for the last several years, but also to fill you in on those recent adjustments in the thought process about how this might be funded. Because again, I know that Mr. Mayor is aware of this, but there have been a number of different iterations about the ability to fund improvements at the municipal airport and how that might be undertaken. And periodically, we're called upon as a city to provide a letter of support to the Federal Aviation Administration, to members of Congress, asking for some type of financial assistance or additional ways in which revenue can be generated to meet the needs of the authority so that they can proceed with their expansion, the long-planned expansion. Recently, new information and new opportunities have been presented, and I thought it was important, aside from the information that I provided to you, that someone from the authority be present to just give an overview of not only the project, but where we are right now from a financial opportunity standpoint. Mr. McKay was very gracious enough to accept our invitation. He's been at several of the meetings that I've been at, and certainly has a better handle on some of the information that he brought forward to myself and other city managers throughout the region. So I think it's important, again, given some of the deadlines that we may be faced with, to get that information out for you folks and to have someone who can explain it probably a little bit better than I can. So Mr. McKay, you're up.
All right. As AJ said, I'm Brian Mulcahy from the Des Moines Airport Authority. I'm the Director of Finance, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address you today. Kevin Foley is our Executive Director at the airport. He's recovering from a surgery, so he regrets not being able to be with you today. The Airport Authority, similar to what was just described on the utility, the water utility, is an independent entity operated by, or governed by 5 board members who are appointed by the City of Des Moines Council and Mayor. The airport is we mark it as Iowa's airport. We have the majority of passenger traffic and 50% of air cargo. We are not supported by taxes, other than we receive money from the FAA and the state of Iowa Department of Aviation for some capital repairs. We have a catchment study from 2018, just a huge amount of data that's collected on our passengers. One thing in there that is kind of surprising to some people is that actually 42% of the passengers going through the Des Moines Airport are coming into Iowa and leaving back out, versus we all often just think of the airport is used by the people who live here, but we do have quite a percentage of people who are coming in. So those are people coming into all the communities around Des Moines for business, leisure, and everything else. This slide here is an example of some of the information from that study. This particular page shows the top zip codes that use the Des Moines Airport Authority. You can see there Urbandale is number 3. West Des Moines is the first 2. We actually get down to number 10 before you get a Des Moines zip code. So that's another maybe interesting fact, but it's surprising to some people that who's actually using the Des Moines Airport on a day-by-day basis. This next slide here, we're proud of the air service that we've got right now through Des Moines. We've really enhanced that over the last certainly 10 years, but even in the last 5 years, our route map has grown. And we're also returning to 2019 levels here pretty quickly. We've been anywhere from 85 to 95% of 2019 in the last 3 months. So we've quickly returned to the constrained environment that we were in back in 2019. It depends on the time of day that you're out at the airport. Some people are shocked when we say there's constraints because they can walk into the airport and there's hardly anybody at the ticket counters, and they don't really think there's any capacity issue. If you were out there overnight, you would see all of the parking spots at the gates are full of airplanes, to the point that now with Allegiant coming in with 2 aircraft and wanting to add a 3rd, we have no more parking available overnight on the terminal gates, which makes us less competitive with the airlines. It costs them more to operate when they can't park on the gates. So that's one example of where our facility is facing constraints. This slide is just a layout slide for what the path we're on. This was developed in a 2017 terminal programming study. And in that study, we didn't do any design necessarily, but it's a process through the FAA that requires us to identify square footage requirements for all areas of the airport at different passenger levels. And then that is used to develop some cost data. But then it also goes all the way back to the roadway network of what do you need to do to size the roadways for different passenger levels. If anybody's been out to the airport in the last couple months, you use the new entrance. We just opened up that new entrance. That's the red on the screen. Next summer, we'll be starting to construct the purple. You see where that will loop around back towards Fleur and then loop into the orange box, which is the parking garage expansion. Then it will swing out to the right of the screen to the new terminal, eventual new terminal in green. I included a few renderings of the what we have so far on the roadway. We haven't designed really anything beyond the roadways, and we're starting to design the the garage expansion. But this is the entrance. That artwork is going to be installed here, hopefully in December. It's being provided by the Greater Des Moines Art Foundation for use at the airport. So we're excited to get that installed here, hopefully in the next month. This is a rendering of when you come off of Fleur and head back north towards the new terminal. We've got a little bit of that road in now. You can see up ahead there, then you'll start to peel off to the right. That'll be the loop around, and continuing on will be into the garage, or continuing ahead will be onto the terminal. This is a look from Fleur. I don't think that retaining wall will be quite that high, but this is where that loop will come around, and you'll enter into the parking garage expansion from that angle. These are some renderings of the terminal itself, but again, there's no design been completed on this. We do want to kind of follow the idea of steel and glass and having it open and a lot of natural light coming in. But a lot of decisions are yet to be made obviously on the terminal itself, the design. The picture in the lower right is a view of, as you're coming down Fleur from the north, how that might look. It's those planes will appear really close to Fluor compared to what they are today. So here's the money slide, literally the money slide, what it's going to cost and where we're at. We think the 575 is a good estimate at this point. Our last estimate was done in 2017, so as you all know, prices are much different than they were then. To date, the Des Moines Airport Authority has completed about $85 million of enabling projects back to 2017. We've been working on the south quadrant of the airport since then. About $90 million will finish the roadway and the garage, which Des Moines Airport Authority has the resources to make happen. But then we get into the terminal, which we do not have those resources. On the funding sources side, the private investment that's been spent to date and will be spent in the next 12 months as Signature completes their expansion. The authority reserves line, we feel confident that the authority can make that happen from what we've spent already through what we would spend going forward on the terminal. And then we get to the money that we essentially need to fill the gap. And so we've had conversations with the state of Iowa regarding a pretty sizable grant. And the state of Iowa has given us a few things to meet to get those grants. One is that they would like to see a dollar for dollar match of any money that they provide. So that's money provided by the authority, regional communities, or even the FAA. So just to have that dollar for dollar match. The second thing was that they would like to see regional support for the project. So the metro communities making a contribution to the terminal, just to see the community, the regional support for the project. We don't know what we potentially will get out of the infrastructure bill that passed at the federal level. We think there's about roughly $20 million, maybe 15 to 20 million that would be essentially guaranteed for the airport and new money because it's formula driven under the legislation from the Senate bill that was passed a while ago. Then there's another bucket of money that is specifically for airport terminals, but it'll be competitively bid. And the competition will not, we won't have the details of that probably for another at least 3 months. And then the process will carry out, probably over the next fiscal year. The plan is for that to be split over 5 years. So every airport is going to suddenly have a terminal project that they will be submitting for that. And so we are in a good place to compete, I believe, though, because we've completed all of our environmental analysis and we have plans to start design as soon as we have the money. This is a breakdown of the municipal county investment. I believe AJ has shared this with you already. We based it on a per capita number. Des Moines at $50, most of the others at 30 or 10. And then also a similar methodology for the counties to contribute. And there's, we propose it over a 4-year schedule. The timing, I can tell you, is not as important to us as just having a commitment and participation that we can take to the state. Our project timeline, as I mentioned, we've opened the first phase of the roadway, expect to complete phase 2 next year. If we have the money identified, we will begin design on the terminal. The parking garage is under design and we expect to start construction in 23 to finish in 24. And then we could start terminal construction as early as 24 based on some other airfield projects that have to happen first. And then we could complete the terminal probably as early as late 26. So our request, we would really appreciate the commitments from the regional communities that we can take that and then leverage that with the state, hopefully the $34 million from the communities to leverage that for 300 plus million from the state and federal level. If that's successful, we will then construct this terminal and hopefully be a regional asset to help sustain long-term economic growth in Iowa. So that's the end of my presentation. I would appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here and present to you. And if you have any questions, more than happy to answer.
I've got a question. Thank you for, this is a very interesting report. And, you know, I'm very supportive of a regional approach to this. I think that the zip code data that you presented is very compelling, that the Des Moines zip codes don't come in till number 10. So given that you're independent from the city of Des Moines and you're asking for significant contributions from the suburbs, what voice do those non-Des Moines communities have in governance? Would there be any consideration in changing how that governing board is created or comprised?
That has come up. In fact, the state of Iowa, that's one of the three items they would like us to meet. One of them originally was from the state of Iowa, was that it become a regional authority. There's a couple reasons that at this time that could be a challenge. As we talked about with the waterworks, the time it takes to make that happen is a bit of a challenge compared to the compressed timeline we have for this money that's potentially available. The money that we think is probably available from the state is some of the ARPA funding that needs to be obligated and spent by 2026. So becoming a regional authority in that time and actually completing construction and everything by 2026 would be probably a challenge. We have agreed or committed to creating an advisory board for the design and construction of the terminal for the regional communities that are willing to contribute. We would set up that advisory board so that each community has an opportunity to provide input on the design and construction. As the authority, as a staff member, you know, I don't have necessarily an opinion on or a vote on whether or not we become a regional authority. The reality of the matter, though, is that it could be difficult to do that now for this topic and still meet the spending timelines of that money that's potentially available.
But you would say that that is something that is on the table, though, for further discussion?
Well, I don't want to speak for anybody, you know, especially the city of Des Moines who appoints the current board. I mean, I think it's probably something that could be brought up and discussed longer term. I can't, to be honest, the staff members, we can argue both sides of it. I don't think that the authority itself would be governed or operated any differently if it was regional versus the way it is today, because our board is truly independent, or has been essentially independent. Our board chair often says that his conversations with the city of Des Moines is always to do what's best for the airport. And so I don't know that the operation would be any different under a regional authority. However, I understand we're asking regional communities for money for this terminal project, and you all have ways to spend the money within your city limits differently. So
I appreciate your answer. I just have one quick question related to Dallas County and cities. What do you mean by "and cities" on the requested regional support? Would Dallas County be paying those, or would those be like the smaller non-suburban communities?
yeah, that's the reason we put "and communities" on there for the counties is just we haven't had those conversations yet with those counties, and we don't think it's going to be a successful venture to try to go to all the small communities in those counties and try to ask them for each one for various amounts. We thought it might be more productive to go to the county and cities together and treat them as a bucket. I can tell you I've had a conversation with Warren County, with Norwalk, and Warren County's already talking, you know, Norwalk and Indianola and the county itself are starting to talk about how they will participate. So that's really the reason we have it on there that way. Obviously, I do have Waukee still on here separately from Dallas County. So Dallas County, the amount on here for Dallas County would be probably the county, and then I'm not sure how they would facilitate that throughout the county.
Because we, like West Des Moines, Clive, Urbandale, all have, you know, significant portions of their population in Dallas County. So would we be double
Well,
tapped?
I guess it comes back to the conversation we had with Dallas County and how they choose to pay that, if they're going to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So with the expansion, you talked about overnight parking as a challenge. How much more overnight parking does this allow for with the terminal expansion? I mean, we talking moving from 10 jets to 50 jets, or what is it?
I'm sorry, moving from 10 to what?
So it, just overnight expansion, how many more aircraft could hang out overnight, I guess, with the expansion idea?
Aircraft parking. The current plan was, in 2017, was just to build 14 gates, which is only an incremental 2 gates from what we have today, but it did not provide a lot of extra incremental aircraft parking. We think now that we need to just go straight to 18 gates, which was the second expansion of that plan. We've got about 21 parking spots right now for aircraft. That could potentially get us 4 or 5 more on the terminal. And I think those are accurate numbers. Our engineer would know better, but the other piece that this plan provides is much better off-gate parking for the aircraft. We have very little of that today. We have about 3 parking spots off the gates right now. We could get up to 9 remote sites. So it wouldn't solve everything being on the terminal gates, but it would at least provide more overnight parking.
Okay. And then the second, you mentioned flexibility on timing of payment. So you kind of got a 4-year payment schedule, but if we needed it to be a 10-year payment schedule beyond the construction timeline, is that something that you've talked about as a staff of being able to allow?
Yeah, it's more important that we know what you're committing to and what the schedule is, and then we will work the financing around that. I think the $34 million that we're asking from the communities for is not the long pole in the tent, so to speak. I think, and so we can probably adjust our financing plan to accommodate the schedules that the communities are willing to follow.
I mean, we've done similar plans, but I think we've had 20-year schedules. I mean, for the Iowa Event Center, was that a 20-year schedule? What's that? 10 years? So, I mean, I would think that something like that would be consideration. And the further Councilmember Carmen Montgomery's comments, that's exactly where I was going to go before she asked the question. You know, there's been the discussion of governance of the airport utility for as long as I've been involved in local government, and it just seems like with this level of ask, I appreciate your comment. I mean, and where you're coming from, Brian, but I do think that's something that we need to certainly consider when we're looking at this is whether this is truly a regional authority or not. Just like we are working on the water authority, but you know, we've been able to come to a regional authority for transit and for wastewater and other solutions. So I do think that's something that certainly from Urbandale's standpoint, we'd want to have considered, so. Any other comments or questions?
Really appreciate your time today, and if there's any other questions or that come up, feel free to reach out through AJ, and we'll get back to you.
And don't mistake our comments. I mean, we truly believe in that the airport is a regional asset and it benefits all of the community. So don't take it that we're against this by any means, but it's just.
I'm sorry, I can't give you a better answer on
Yeah.
your questions. I think that you can argue both ways, and it really comes down to a timeliness issue right now.
Yeah.
That may prevent us getting a piece of the money that is potentially available.
Certainly, I understand that. So thank you for coming out and explaining that. I appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
AJ, can you explain like what you see as the time frame for us taking action on this?
Again, Ryan can address some of the timeframes that the state's put in place, but if they are going to use ARPA money, then there are those specific timeframes outlined by the federal government. One of the things we've talked about, and again, Brian can address this as well, I think they're looking for a commitment from the cities or all the other outside entities by the 1st or mid-January of 2022. That fits into our budget cycle. So again, those kind of coincide, and those are some of the parameters that I think the state is putting on them as well. So for us, if within the next month, through the remainder of the month of November through December, as we prepare and present budget opportunities for you, you'll have to come to some conclusion as to how you wish to approach this. As Councilmember Obrecht alluded to, if there's opportunities for us to extend that beyond 4 years, maybe it's a 5-year, maybe it's a 6, 10, whatever it might be, it certainly, our annual contribution becomes much more manageable as we push that out. Finance Director Lamb and I have talked about, if the council is so inclined to participate, and again, depending upon the length, it would also, that kind of drives a discussion about where the resources are that we would draw from in order to meet our obligation. And so I think, that will be in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Those are questions that will, if we can bring, now that we know that there are some options moving that needle forward, we can certainly give you options about, if our number stays at that, $330,000, I think it was for a 4-year commitment, $1.3 million was our number. If that can be elongated, then certainly that gives us more options. But our initial thought is that this is a one-time contribution for a capital expenditure, and therefore we would look at resources that would be more inclined, it's a more logical place to search out and to present those financial resource options for you. And again, if it's tied to, aside from the financial end of it, if there's a tie to a further commitment for a regional authority or some type of voice, as you mentioned, on this, then that certainly is discussions that we can have ongoing. But I think there is that time crunch that has been explained to me earlier, and I think he alluded to it as well, that those may have to run parallel courses, and that discussion on regionalization may not, it may be elongated past the funding commitment. They have sample 2080 agreements and resolutions that they've supplied to us. I have not provided those to the city attorney yet based on this conversation, but certainly those ones that we would have to enact theoretically before the end of the calendar year based on the calendar that we've been given.
Maybe just a question for AJ and maybe the mayor too, because I think both the regional authority is probably a good direction, but I'd hate to lose the opportunity to take advantage of all the dollars available from the state. Is there a path in which the regional authority comes together after the commitment on the dollars, or do you lose enough leverage that that's just an impossibility? Or more to come on?
The initial discussion that we've had at the staff level has been, because this is a capital project, and we always try to leverage anything that we can. We've had that longstanding policy here in our community, and that was echoed by other city managers and other staff members, is that, if the opportunity is presented to our city to leverage our dollar for $5, would we look at it? Well, we certainly would. Operationally, that's really been nothing that's come across my desk that has piqued my interest, in the sense that, we have a lot of plates we're spinning now. So, but the airport is really served as a regional. And then again, if we're putting money into it, but if it's only one-time money, then it becomes a logical, part of the discussion is how much should we have past the construction stage? How much say should we have? And does that open the door for an ask for operational money? So that's one of the things I would be cautious about. And that's just my off-the-cuff thought process, is that if they're asking for money that we could generate over a 4 to 6 to 10 year period for one time and don't come back to us, then it's one less thing that I have to worry about as far as competing for the monies that you have available to provide local services. And that is strictly a parochial and selfish answer. I certainly appreciate the regional concept of it, but I'll leave that to a higher level of discussion.
Wow. That's the flip side of it.
Yeah. No, I can appreciate that. I think more to follow, I'm sure.
All right. Thank you again, Brian. Appreciate that. All right. That takes us to the end of our agenda. Anything further to go to the order today?
Oh, did you want to talk about the UCAN email, or we could do that next week about the light up?
Yeah, we can finalize it next week, but should we just plan on having a little station? I don't know. We can hand out Urban Loop pint glasses.
For the drive around Walker Johnson, Laura asked if we wanted to have a city station.
I think we have a city station of some sort. I don't know exactly what we'll do, but we'll figure.
I know who's in charge of decorations.
City staff will support council, whatever you want to do, and however you want to man it, that's fine.
All right, let's plan on doing something. We'll maybe discuss a little more, give
Okay.
it some thought, and let's discuss it next Tuesday. So that sounds good, so. All right,
Motion to adjourn.
is there a second?
On behalf of Ron, I'll second.
All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.